it is a privilege and an honor to be here and to kind of take some time with you and kind of step back a little bit from the day-to-day work that we all do and try to put it a little bit in perspective. So this idea of the 21st century CFO was an attempt to sort of capture a set of thinkings about how the world is changing and how technology and the world are intersecting to create a lot of change, and how the finance function is at the core of a lot of that. And a lot of the change is revolving around finance, as business always has. And so how does the role of the financial advisor and financial professional evolve in this situation? And last year I had the privilege of doing a bunch of work with the AI CPA, and so I got a chance to spend a lot of time with the CPA side of finance, more on the independent side, and now with Intact, seeing it more on the inside corporate side. So I want to share with you some ideas about where this is all heading and how it might be impacting you, and give you, as Rob said, to give you a framework, a tool that maybe you can take back and have some great conversations with your fellow colleagues about how about getting the most out of the finance function in your enterprise. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the contextual forces that are sort of changing the world around us a little bit, just to kind of ground us. And then I want to talk about this issue of systems of engagement and how they can be a lever for change inside your company. And then we're going to have, by the way, a panel of 3 CFOs come up here and kind of bring it back down to like this year, these companies, so that there'll be a kind of a grounding at the end of the talk. So 21st century business dynamics. So one of the things that's really dramatically changed the world, and it started happening in the 1990s, but it really came into full bore in this century, is the whole outsourcing of the economy, which has completely disaggregated the economy, and it's impacted everybody. It obviously impacts the mega corporations dramatically, but it impacts every other corporation too, because what happens with outsourcing is as the outsourcing work goes someplace else, and they start, initially it's a wage arbitrage, but then eventually the standard of living starts getting better, as we've seen it do in Japan, we've seen it do in China, we've seen it do it now in Korea, we're seeing it now in Vietnam. And when that happens, the outsourcing community has to start finding ways to preserve margin, so they start automating. Whenever you start automating any process, it starts to commoditize. And so the core processes get more and more commoditized. And then, if you live in a developed economy, as I think most of us here do, maybe all of us here do, now all of a sudden that starts to put price pressure on whatever it is your company does. And your company is now in a world where it's saying, we have to differentiate more than we had in the past, because first of all, our markets are no longer protected against low-cost competition. And second of all, the low-cost competition is getting pretty damn good. So we've got to get better. So we have to differentiate if we're going to maintain the margins that allow us to, come to places like this nice casino here in Las Vegas. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have to specialize. And so what you've seen is firms get essentially smaller. Employment is happening in the middle and the bottom of the business space, not at the top. We're laying people off at the top and bringing them into the middle and even more so into the bottom, but with much more specialization. Companies have much more specialization because they're able to then use this outsourcing infrastructure to offload the things that they don't want to specialize in. They optimize their own operations by essentially saying, well, let's give that work to our partners. And in fact, we now create an engine of growth. This room is an example of that engine of growth, right? So this is a very partner-oriented room that we're in right now, because the folks at Intact have said, we need to differentiate and specialize against our competition. We need to have a lot of the work our customers needs to be done by the partners in this room. That's happening all over the world right now. And you look at this thing, and it just keeps going, right? And it's driving economic growth as long as you can keep up. The thing that happens to countries who get stuck, and we've seen this in Europe right now, particularly in Southern Europe right now, is they try to hold on at some point and say, I don't want to have to be on this continual wheel of improvement, so you try to like hold on to an entitlement, and then you get kind of run over. So the game is you do have to keep up. And the framework I want to share with you is about how to think about that keeping up. And the way we do that is we say, look, you look at these 6 forces, but in fact, they're kind of divided into 2 sets. The ones above this line we call context. And the framework I'm going to tell you about is called core and context. This is the idea I hope you can take home and use with your conversations with your colleagues. So if you look at what's above the line, optimizing, the context is things that you have to do. You have to do them well, but there's no prize for doing them well. However, there's a penalty for doing them badly. Okay? So context is, you know, you don't get a prize for doing it brilliantly, but you get a penalty for doing it badly. So it's frankly, welcome to the world of finance, right? Or IT, by the way, for those of you in IT, right? Nobody ever calls the IT guy and says, hey, the email server stayed up again last night, way to go, right? But just have a tiny little problem with Obamacare and boom. Yeah, right, okay. So context is kind of, it's something that we're professionally committed to manage. So, and that means the optimizing, which means taking cost out. It means managing the outsourcing relationships, managing not only the financial aspects of that, but the control, the quality, the timing, all that stuff. The automating and the commoditizing of things inside our own company, wherever that's appropriate, all of that is context. And it needs to be done professionally, and people want to do it to a certain standard, but not more than that, because there's no prize for doing more than that. And it's very important to make sure you don't fall short of norms. Sarbanes-Oxley has a few little rules about that too. Okay, that's all context. Now, core is where your company, and core is not about the finance function. This is about your company. And finance is in service to your company, whether it's context or core. But so the question I'm going to ask these CFOs to come up here is, what is core for your company? How do you guys differentiate? What is the differentiation that you want to double down on and take forward and spend against? And how do you specialize? What is it that makes you hard to copy? And what does it make your domain expertise or your technical expertise or whatever it is, your service capability, what is it that makes it distinctive? And when you're thinking now about any shared service function, whether it's IT, human resources, finance, marketing, any shared service function, you have roles on both sides of this line, but the place where you can most interestingly move the needle is in core. And so I'm going to be asking our CFOs, where is core in your company and how does the financial systems interact with that? At the same time, because of global pressures, the pressure on context has never been bigger. And that's why the improvements in IT systems and all this cloud SaaS stuff that we're talking about here at Intact and in a lot of other tech companies is so darn important, because we can't manage the amount of context we have today with the systems that we had yesterday. That's the huge pressure on IT right now. So we look at this and we say, okay, how does this apply to us? Well, okay, so as a finance function, as a control function in particular, your first job is to keep us out of jail, right? So we don't look good in orange jumpsuits. The orange is not the new black. This is not the place to go. So make sure we're compliant, help us optimize to reduce costs, make it easier to do business with us. That one, by the way, is creeping closer to core, but I still think it's context. And the truth of the matter is, for most successful companies, you are miserable to do business with. Okay, just start there. I mean, because the challenge is, because we're dealing with a set of 30 to 40 years of legacy infrastructure, and you've had acquisitions and mergers and whatever, and it's just a mess. It's just a mess. And the problem is, no matter how hard you try, you end up exposing that mess to your customers and, in fact, forcing your customers to go through that mess in order to do business. So there's a lot of work to do on context. It's important work. And I don't want to in any way suggest that it's deprioritized. It's a high priority. Core is this added upside, which increasingly in an era of specialization and differentiation is important for us to get more out of, because we've got to squeeze all the differentiation and specialization we can get from our companies. So help us see what we are missing. One of the wonderful things about financial systems, particularly where in the cloud, particularly when you can benchmark against other people in your own industry, and because of all these new analytics, you can see a lot of stuff that we never could see before. And so help us see what we're missing. Help us reinforce our core vector of differentiation. The conversation I want you to have is to get an agreement with your colleagues about what is the essence of core, and then take that back in every function of the company, but in the finance function in particular, what could we do differently to accentuate our core? If that was our #1 mission in life, how would we operate our function differently, or our IT system differently, or our partner system, whatever it is, what would we do differently? And then the third thing is, because of this new, much more real-time sense, much more cloud sense, out in the world sense, what's happening now? Increasingly, what's happening now is happening in a digital environment. It used to be, in the 20th century, digital systems were post-facto records of things that happened in the physical world. They were history systems. We call them systems of record. In the 21st century, it's happening in the digital world itself. And so they're starting to become nervous systems, not history systems. But a nervous system has to give you the feedback in time for you to react. And that's a pressure that we always had in the back of our minds to put on IT, but frankly, it was never very realistic. If you close the books in X number of weeks, right, and that kind of stuff, that's a history problem. And now it's like, no, I need to dynamically update things. New world, and lots of innovation is going into IT right now to do that. And the consumer guys have just blown us away. So the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples and the Amazons have shown us that if you make this your core, the capability of IT to perform magic is Harry Potter-like, right? And so the opportunity is there, but you know, frankly, we're not Google, right? I mean, we don't have farms and farms and farms of computers and data scientists with weird glasses and all that. We don't have those, right? So the question is, how much can we bring to our company? But I think with things like Intact into the SaaS world and the cloud world, it's more accessible now than ever before, and it's getting even more so every year. So that's what I want you to be thinking about. So here's the core context model. It's just a framework which says, look, can you identify with your colleagues what is core in our company? How do we distinctively differentiate ourselves from our reference competitors? And also, in that mission of ours, what is mission critical? What is the thing that we must never fail at if we are going to be the company that we assert that we are? Okay? And so anything that happens in that sort of intersection is like ground zero. That is the essence of our company. Whatever we do, we want to perform at our very, very best in that quadrant. Okay? Now, if you move over to the right, there's a bunch of stuff that's still mission critical, but it's not core. And that is the stuff that's the stuff that you've got to get done at a standard that does not fall. You cannot be in default here. You cannot miss. But you don't want to overcommit here, because at some point after it's good enough, there's no prize for making it better than that. And this is one of the hard things with people, particularly when there's risk, and there's a lot of risk in quadrant B. No matter how much risk you take off the table, you could always spend more money to take more risk off. So finding the efficient frontier of risk to mitigate versus risk to take is probably the single biggest challenge of any control function, and the finance function is right in the middle of that. Because every dollar you spend to mitigate risk in B is a dollar that you didn't spend in A. Now, if you've already spent all your dollars in A and you've got leftover dollars, God bless, B is the best place, is a very good place to spend them. But when you start realizing I'm spending so much in B, I'm actually starving A, now you're making a mistake. And that's hard to see because, well, I'm reducing risk. Yes, you are. But at the sacrifice of our identity, not worth it. Now, the other place that's interesting on this chart are things that are not mission critical. These are places where you can innovate and you can experiment. And the most exciting place to do that is with core. Next generation core. Let's try it out. It probably isn't going to be perfect, but let's get it going. And think about your systems and how hard it is for innovation to happen in a big company if everybody has to obey every one of the AB systems like this. You know, I'm trying to innovate, and it's hard. Okay? So thinking about how can I release control functions so I can have more freedom in C. And then D looks kind of like a leftover, but it's not. D is how could we re-engineer the world to just free up more resources to spend in A, B, and C. And if you look at the world of the IT systems that live in the financial domain, and you say, where do we invest against these goals? Look, financial systems, the core, the general ledger, the AP, the AR, all that stuff, that is mission critical context. It's harder to imagine anything that's more mission critical context than a general ledger. Right? It is the system of record. So it cannot be wrong, but getting it like brilliantly decorated doesn't buy you anything. So financial systems. D is an interesting place because that's where you can do a lot of business process reengineering, and often that is led by what's typically led by Six Sigma, black belts, and often they come out of the financial function, or at least part of the team comes out of the financial function, because they're almost always data-driven, quantity-driven, and the financial systems have the data. Being able to get at that data, however, has historically been very, very challenging. And so part of the new financial systems in the 21st century CFO role is to say we need to have information systems that allow us to get at the data underlying our business processes so that we continually evolve and improve them. Because that's the only way we can keep up with this cycle of specialization, differentiation, optimization, et cetera. When you look at C, the opportunity to find opportunities in the data, this is really the world of analytics right now. We're just now crossing the chasm with this in most businesses. We've had analytics forever about kind of our system of record. So we could analyze our system of record till the cows come home. But we're analyzing the past, right? The notion now is, can we apply these analytical tools to our business as it is happening, with the opportunity potentially to modify or course correct our business as we are in the middle of evolving it. The people that can do it today do it brilliantly, and they're just cleaning the clocks of everybody in their competition. Amazon does this brilliantly, and they're just a horribly formidable competitor if you're in retail right now. The Google guys have done it brilliantly with information and with advertising and digital advertising and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it's still, I think, more in a few niche markets than in mass market, but it's here. And the thing that's great about it is it's getting cheaper and cheaper to try. And so I think experimenting with analytics to get new insights into your company is really key. And I would argue acting on those insights, taking the insights that you discover in the lower quadrant, and then institutionalizing a very small subset of them as critical performance indicators, as KPIs, as key performance indicators, that's the place where you can change your company. By just saying, in our dashboards, there is an element of the dashboard that actually tunes us to changes in the present that we can act on in time to make a difference in our business success. That's the vision. And I think for the 21st century CFO to say, I only do the right-hand side of this document, this diagram, I don't think that's acceptable. I think it was in the 20th century. I don't think it's acceptable in the 21st century. I think you have to find ways to at least support the work on the left. To find, and particularly in this, with IT-enabled systems and IT-enabled data that has the financial dimensions going forward. So the conversation I would want you to be able to have with this diagram is to sit down with your CEOs and your vice presidents of the various functions and say, okay, guys, what do we think is core? What is core? And it's a conversation, you only have to have it like once a year. Core doesn't change by quarter. It often doesn't even change year to year, but it does change every few years. So it's worth having the conversation once a year, and it's also worth it just to recommit yourself to core. Because the problem with context is urgent, and core is important. And you know how the urgent crowds out the important? Well, context crowds out core. And when you go to do next year's budget and you have this incredible list of context tasks, your first instinct is, I'll get to core when I can, but I've got to make some headway against this context task. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. No matter how much work you do on context, there's still more work to do. After you've spent every dollar you have, you're not done yet. So the only way you can make this diagram work is you have to fund core before you fund context. And so having that conversation of what is core, what is protected, what is special, gets special treatment, it's a really important conversation to have. And then how can we build systems around these four quadrants? And the systems in each quadrant are going to be slightly different. It's going to be one system, but the pressure you put on it, the kind of teams you put against it are different in each of these quadrants. So I'm hoping you can have that conversation with your colleagues, given the opportunity that these next generation information systems, of which Intact is a terrific example, give you an opportunity to do. And you'll see stuff at this conference and next year's conference and the conference after that you'll look at and you go, wow, we don't use that. Now, should we use that? And that's when you start looking at these diagrams and saying, well, if we used it, what quadrant would we use it in? What would we use it for? So I want to pursue that idea a little bit further. So this notion of what kind of systems? Systems of record are the key to mission critical context. That is the function you cannot miss. But the other three areas are developing around something that we're calling systems of engagement. Now, systems of record were based on databases and using computers to collect data. Systems of engagement are based on using computers to interact with people. And the consumer world has just, Apple in particular, has shown us how the computer, when you devote the computer to the human experience, it becomes transformative. And I would argue that the iPad has become transformative for business systems and the way we interact with managers. So if you look at the systems of record versus systems of engagement, because everyone in this room has got a foot in both camps. Primarily a foot that was historically in systems of record, shifting over to systems of engagement. Oops, nope. Which one do we have? Okay, it's working. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay, so data center and cloud are the move from data center to cloud is creating an opportunity to engage in the world, not just with our history. The move from desktop to mobile is it's taking us to the moment of interaction. So we're actually, we don't have to be at a computer anymore. The computer is being at us, right? So that puts the system right in the middle of things. When you look at the software license versus SaaS thing, the problem with the software license at the end of the day was once you installed it, the last thing you want to do is install it again. So you would not implement the next release, no matter what. And you probably would not implement the release after that either. So you see what you did? I mean, the way that system worked, and everybody was prisoner to it. There was no villain here. But that meant if you bought release A, you did not buy release B, you did not buy release C, you bought release D and went through open heart surgery in order to do. Okay, so how screwed up is that, right? I mean, there's two-thirds of all the innovation you don't get to use until, and you continually have to put your enterprise at risk. So it's a horrible system, right? So again, no wonder we didn't get wild and crazy with our IT systems, right? There's no permission, there's no opportunity to do it. And then the fourth thing is, computing was created, the client side of client-server computing was created around personal computing. That's my era. We're moving to a world of collaborative interactions. When you outsource things and you create these communities and business networks, all of a sudden, individual productivity takes a backseat to collective productivity. And we're seeing this with the younger generation and with social networks in the consumer world take off. But now we're saying, okay, well, we need business social networks. We need chatter, jive, lithium kinds of things. We need to work as a team better. And it's a culture shock. I work with a lot of these younger companies, and I explain to them, they say, Geoffrey, don't you want to collaborate? And I go, listen, you got to understand. When I went to school, collaboration was called cheating, right? You got kicked out of school for collaborating, right? So it's a new framework, right? And the point about this new framework is just the new systems are there to do the orange, but there's a kind of a culture change as much as anything else to get there. And that's part of the function. The IT and finance have always had a very, very tight bond. And so helping, and I would argue that if IT thought any function would be holding it back, it would be finance. They'd say, well, those finance guys, systems of record, they're never going to let go. And I think this is why the 21st century CFO has to say, well, for mission critical context, you're absolutely right, we will not let go, period. But for these other opportunities, we need to explore. And that's the 21st century idea. So in this model then, to help your colleagues kind of get this distinction, systems of record, that's been the history. Rob and I have known each other for 30 years in this industry. We built systems of record, and we built them over and over and over again. That's what we did. They were database focused, they run the economy, they're mission critical information, and they are challenging to learn and use. You always had to have a user support and training and documentation like this. Systems of engagement took over the world by storm in this century, user experience focused, not a user interface, a user experience, right? Engaged hearts and minds, mission critical relationships. So all of a sudden now, we're relating to each other through these systems, but very challenging to secure. And so when you look at these together, you say, wow, combine systems of engagement with systems of record for maximum impact. That's clearly the game. It's not an easy game to play. This is going to take a decade to sort out. It's just that you got to be in front of it enough to say, we want to sort this out. We want to make this thing successful. We're not going to just hang on to the left side of this diagram and kind of hope that we can, retire before we have to confront the right-hand side of the diagram. Because, well, there may be some of us who are going, well, that's not a bad strategy, actually, Geoffrey. I might try that. But the problem is if you're in any war for talent, the next generation of talent just says, I can't even act without systems of engagement. I mean, it's sort of like, this is like sending me to school without pen and paper. I mean, this is the pen and paper of the 21st century. We need these things. We have to have them. And so it does create challenges. It does create security challenges, all this kind of stuff. But at the margin, this is that thing about how much risk will you mitigate before you say, I have to allow my company to take some amount of risk or we cannot participate in the next opportunity. And finding that area of judgment, that's at the core of, the CFO has always been perceived as the consigliere, the trusted advisor counsel to the CEO. This is what it's about. It's about understanding the domain of risk and managing risk in a way that allows you to pursue opportunity but curtails the downside. And it's quite a subtle profession that you're in doing that. Now, if you think about this in terms of where would we do this first, because different organizations have different amounts of appetite for embracing change. Some organizations like to get ahead of the herd. We call them visionary organizations. A lot of them just want to stay with the herd. It's kind of like a pragmatic approach. And some would like to say, I'd like to kind of go after the herd. And I'd like to put it off for as long as I can, but I'll come eventually, but I want to do it late. And if you go late, the idea is I'm probably going to get it cheaper with fewer bugs, but you've probably foregone the productivity advantages longer than maybe you needed to. The middle one is kind of the one that most people stick with, which is if I just kind of keep up with things at the margin, I'm probably not too far off. And I'm not really, this isn't my expertise. The people who go early, if they're gifted at it, get enormous advantages from it, but they're taking more risk. And if your organization is not gifted, if you have a passion for going early, but your organization is more pragmatic or conservative, you can get yourself in a bad spot. So it's really important to understand both your personal attitude toward going early, as well as your organization's ability to embrace change. And again, you need to make judgments there. So this is a kind of a stairway to heaven model, and it sort of says the more conservative organization is going to be more interested in doing actions at the bottom of the stairway, and the more progressive or visionary organization is going to want to be more interested at the top, and pragmatic people are going to be spending maybe more toward the middle. So here's how it goes. I think the minimum thing is, it's just crazy not to be in the cloud. Which is weird, because about 7 years ago, you would have said, it's just crazy to be in the cloud, right? But the truth is, the single source of the truth model, the ability to have multi-tenant hosted things, so that we can update, one update gets to everyone immediately, as opposed to this horrible release model that really kind of strangled our. I hope they're not bombing us back there, but this notion of single source of the truth, all digital, available 24/7, so we don't have to run a report. Get your own report, right? It's right here. Get your own report, right? Okay. So there's a lot to do there that I think that makes sense. Mobile is, I think, that's the thing, the BYOD, the bring your own device model, the notion of how transformative the iPad is in terms of registering situations and information and communication. The fact that the Los Angeles school district just went out and bought 70,000 of them to give to school children, only to have them hack them within 5 hours. It was a pretty simple hack, actually. But the point was, why did they do that? Because you see little, like 15-month-old girls on the internet doing this, and it's like, whoa. Okay, so it's obviously very cool. So if a 15-month-old could do it, maybe your CEO could do it too. I mean, it's possible. It's possible, right? So we could do this. We could do it. So okay, so that feels pretty good. Okay, yeah. Social is, I think, a little more advanced. It kind of depends on the culture of your company. It also depends on what kind of business you're in. But if you're in a consulting business, you're in the social business. I mean, basically, everything you do is inherently social because it's collaborative with your client. If you're in a creative industry, you're hyper-social because there's many interacting agencies and creative teams that pull together to make a product launch or an ad campaign or a movie or a show or a piece of media or whatever it is. If you're in financial services at the high end and you're involved with an IPO or you're involved with, you know, exotic derivatives or any of that stuff, again, it's becoming more social, much more social. So real-time feeds to keep people in touch with things, anything where you have account management. The social and sales are going, that's probably where it happens first. I don't think it's an accident that Salesforce.com has been the first SaaS company and now one of the first social companies. It's because it's inherent in the sales motion to be social. So again, but again, think about your core. Is it our core? Is social important to our core? Is mobile important to our core? And then we get to analytics, and as I've said, analytics has been with us for a long time, and the original analytics we still use, and they would be on these iPad dashboards. But frankly, the analytics we had from the 20th century, the challenges with them were, A, they were all history, B, if you have any scale, you had to put your data into a data warehouse. That was just like the myth of Sisyphus, just trying to push a rock uphill. And the problem with it is as soon as you get it there, it's out of date, and nobody trusts it, and it's a single source of falsehood. And so it's not a good place to be. But if you can make analytics more real time, then all of a sudden, and therefore you don't put them in a data warehouse, and there is an inherent ambiguity in the data. We're not trying to pretend it's a single source of the truth. It's an evolving picture. All of a sudden, analytics are creating an opportunity to perform at scale in a global economy. That's pretty darn interesting. So companies like Intact and the rest of the industry, we're investing a ton against these four things. There's a company called Cognizant that calls this the SMAC stack. Social, mobile, analytics, and chasm. You know, I was going to call it chasm, right? CH. I mean, it didn't work. But you could have called it scam too. 10 years ago, it would have been social, cloud, analytics, and mobile. Scam. But now it's smack. Now you can talk smack, and so you say, I'm from the finance function. I'm here to talk smack. It'll work. It'll work. If you could have strings playing rock and roll, you can talk smack. So just one last thing before I bring up our CFOs. And it's a really interesting question right now. You know, all of my life in enterprise software, there was a pattern we call the technology adoption life cycle. And when you're at the front end of that cycle, innovation happens in spurts, and it happens in local places. And so particular companies race ahead of the industry. And so best of breed became the way in which you took advantage. If you were a visionary or even an early adopting pragmatist, you bought best of breed. But then when it kind of got all deployed, and you thought, man, I cannot manage 15 or 20 different best of breed vendors, and by the way, they don't talk to each other, and I've tried to bolt it together inside my company, and it's really a mess, and then whenever anybody updates one of those things and I try to install the update, it breaks something else, and so fairly quickly you realize, you know what? Integrated systems is the way to go. They're not great. Nobody has ever said they're great. But you know what? The integration value is huge. And so we had this thing. It was a trade-off issue. And that was in the world of on-premise licensed software, in a client-server architecture in data centers around the world. That is not the world of today. And you have to rethink integration in this new world. So in this new world, the traditional integrated systems makes no sense at all. And the reason why is because where you integrate between business processes in the cloud or architecture is in the cloud. It's all API driven, application programming interface driven. And what you need to push for is industry standardization around APIs so that various facilities will expose their capabilities in standard ways. But the great news about this is the consumer guys who have essentially driven most of the work in the first 15 years of this thing, that's the way they worked from birth. And the open source guys, that's the way they worked from birth. So we've got a lot on our side to say, look, it's API stupid, publish your APIs, maintain your APIs, be responsive to requests against your APIs, et cetera, et cetera. In that world, to integrate more inside of your own application makes no sense unless you're integrating more core. So as long as you're adding core, you should add it inside the app. But as soon as you start adding context strictly for the purpose of integration, that's an architectural mistake in the new world. And that's why Salesforce and Workday are not fighting with each other. Salesforce is not trying to integrate Workday, and Workday is not trying to integrate Salesforce, because Salesforce and Workday, I picked them because they're the two most visible examples, but they talk to each other in the cloud. It's fine. It works. Okay? So the reason why I mention this is because the integration thing, once you do get integrated, you have this cartoon experience, which all of us who've had legacy software, it says here, for God's sake, think. Why is he being so nice to you? Well, it was funny to me anyway. But we spent most, in a licensed software world, that was our world, We acquired customers, we were very nice to them. Once they were in our installed base, they were kind of, So anyway, this is not the world of the future, and I think you should not have to take that risk going forward, regardless of who you do business with. So just to recap, and then we're going to bring up our CFOs. So this notion of business evolving, I do think this disaggregation of business going global has created amazing efficiencies, but it's also created this commoditization impact, which is forcing us all to differentiate more and specialize more. And so there is this Darwinian cycle, and we have to keep up with it. We cannot, we've seen what happens when nations or industries or unions or management, anybody, tries to block the evolution of change, tries to protect their constituents from having to get on this cycle of change. You can protect in the short term at the risk of devastating them in the long term. So much better to embrace this thing. And the core context model is the key to embracing it. It says at the margin, I need to spend on core and extract from context. That's how I stay current with this cycle. I continually try to extract resources from context and invest them in core. And I still have to be responsible for context, but the more I can get other parties to take some of the context off my plate, the better. But at the end of the day, I'm still responsible for outcomes. So that's and the finance function, I think, is right at the heart of that effort, and that's why we're gonna talk about here in just a second. So then build out the systems of engagement that allow you to do that in a timely manner. So differentiate for core, optimize for context, neutralize mission critical risk. Those are the three ideas that keep coming back and back again with the IT thing. Adapt at the fastest speed your culture can sustain. Don't get too far ahead of it, but faster is better in this world if you can stay up with yourselves and then don't fall into the integrated trap. So those are some of the ideas I wanted to share with you. And first of all, so thank you very much for paying attention to that. I really appreciate it.